There are phrases that shouldn't be overlooked, words that may seem small but actually reveal the emotional core of a relationship. When a woman says them, they're not just impulsive reactions, they're cracks in respect, silent warnings that something has broken. The problem is that many men ignore them. They tell themselves she was just having a bad day, that she didn't really mean it, and they stay in a relationship where admiration is already gone. Behind those words lies a deeper message: I don't value you anymore. And when that happens, no matter how much love there is, the bond starts to crumble from within. Many men find themselves trapped in relationships where love has turned into confusion. She criticizes him, compares him, or blames him, and he doesn't understand what he did wrong. He tries to please her, to avoid arguments, to keep the peace, but every attempt only makes the distance worse. It's a draining cycle that kills trust and masculinity. What few people realize is that respect can't be demanded, it's maintained through consistency, and once it's lost, it almost never returns. But there's a liberating truth. Those phrases aren't punishment, they're a filter. They show you whether you're with an emotionally mature woman or with someone who doesn't know how to love without destroying. If this is your first time here, I'm Celia. In this space, I speak to you with the clarity that many others won't, so you can understand the female mind and build relationships grounded in admiration and peace, not tension or guilt. I invite you to subscribe and stay until the end, because in this video, I'm going to show you the 5 phrases a man should never tolerate, and most importantly, the reason why each one marks the beginning of the end of respect. Let's begin. When a woman says, "You embarrass me," she's not just talking about an awkward moment. She's expressing something much deeper, that she's starting to lose the admiration she once felt for you. That phrase, whether said in public or in private, carries a weight many men don't recognize right away, but over time, it erodes the relationship. Humiliation, even in subtle forms, is a way of establishing hierarchy, of saying, "I'm above you." It might sound like a joke, sarcasm, or a casual comment, but behind those words lies a clear message of devaluation. A woman who respects you doesn't need to ridicule you to express a difference of opinion. When she does, her goal isn't understanding, it's to expose weakness. Behind that phrase lies a recurring psychological pattern. She starts to feel superior, and you start to accept it. The relationship enters dangerous ground, where respect becomes a bargaining chip. She might do it in front of friends, family, or even on social media, disguising it as humor. But the truth is, when a woman uses mockery as a tool, she's not communicating, she's punishing. Every time it happens, and the man lets it slide, he loses part of his frame, and she gains control. That energy of humiliation disrupts attraction at its core, because no woman can feel genuine desire for a man she sees as someone to correct. We've already understood that respect doesn't disappear all at once. It erodes gradually. Every misplaced joke, every look of contempt, every "you embarrass me" leaves a mark in the subconscious. Over time, those marks become the new normal. The sad part is that many men justify this behavior with excuses like, "That's just her personality," or "She's always been like that." They don't realize that by doing so, they're reinforcing their own loss of emotional authority. A woman doesn't respect a man who lets himself be corrected like a child, especially not one who smiles while being put down. A healthy couple doesn't need mockery to address an issue. If something bothers you, it's said privately and with empathy. If something bothers her, the same applies. But when one partner is exposed in front of others, what's really behind it is a need for control and a deep lack of emotional maturity. That's why public humiliation is one of the strongest signs that the relationship is turning toxic. At that point, the issue isn't what she says, it's what you tolerate. Picture this: you're at a gathering, and she makes a comment about you that puts you in a bad light. Maybe she covers it with a smile, maybe everyone laughs, and you, to avoid conflict, stay quiet. That silence doesn't make you mature, it makes you invisible. With every silence, you teach her she can do it again. And when respect breaks in public, it's almost impossible to rebuild it in private. Not because you can't talk about it, but because an image has already been imprinted, both in others' eyes and hers, the image of a man who allows himself to be corrected as if he were a mistake. A high-value woman never uses humiliation as communication. An emotionally immature woman does. So when you hear that phrase, don't take it as a comment about a specific moment. Take it as a reflection of what she truly feels about you. If she respects you, she'll speak calmly. If not, she'll expose you. And that's when you have to decide whether you want to stay in a story that diminishes you or have the courage to set a boundary. Respect isn't up for debate, it's shown. And when someone embarrasses you, they're already showing they've lost the ability to see you as an equal. Now, let's talk about another phrase just as dangerous, one that sounds like a compliment but hides comparison and contempt. When a woman says, "You should be more like him," she's not trying to inspire or motivate you to improve, she's comparing you. And behind that comparison lies a loss of respect and attraction. She says it because, in her mind, another man represents something she feels you no longer have. Maybe she says it casually, mentioning a friend, an ex, or even a public figure, but the message is the same. I don't admire you anymore. That phrase slowly destroys the masculine energy within the relationship because it places you in a position of inferiority to someone who doesn't even belong in your story. Deep down, it's meant to create tension, test your reaction, and sometimes even punish you emotionally. A mature woman can acknowledge another man's qualities without demeaning her own partner. But when she does it through comparison, she's taking a direct hit at your ego and emotional leadership. Comparison doesn't motivate, it wounds. And what's worse, if you let it slide, she learns she can do it without consequences. In a woman's mind, respect works like a balance. Every time you stay silent in the face of disrespect, that balance tips a little further toward contempt. And once contempt takes hold, attraction disappears. No woman can feel drawn to a man who tolerates being devalued. We already learned that respect doesn't shatter all at once. It breaks in small doses. This phrase is another one of those cracks that form without you realizing it. When she says you should be more like someone else, what she's really saying is that she wants you to be different. And that's where the fatal mistake happens, when you accept being molded just to please her. A man who changes his essence to avoid comparison ends up losing his authenticity, and with it, his attractiveness. A woman might appreciate that submissiveness for a while, but sooner or later she'll despise it, because she sees in that man someone who bends too easily. You must understand this. When a woman respects her partner, she doesn't compare him. She can notice other men's strengths, of course, but she doesn't feel the need to point them out, because her focus is on what she values in her man, not on what he lacks. If she does it often, it's not because she wants you to improve, it's because she wants to make you feel small. And a man who feels small starts acting that way, seeking approval, trying to please, over-explaining, and ultimately confirming the idea that the other guy is better. Think about how you feel when you hear that phrase. Part of you gets angry, another part tries to reason, and another, deep down, starts to believe it. That's when the psychological damage begins to sink in. You don't notice it right away, but over time, you become more careful, more anxious not to make mistakes, more worried about doing things right. And when she sees you like that, she loses even more interest. Not because you're less capable, but because she sees you as less of a man. Repeated comparisons are the prelude to emotional disconnection and the most subtle form of emasculation in a relationship. The right response isn't to argue or retaliate, but to stand your ground. Set a clear boundary, no shouting, no sarcasm, just firmness. A calm line like, "I don't need to be like anyone else. If you don't like who I am, you're free to choose." That's not a threat. It's a statement of self-worth. And in that moment, even if she doesn't say it, you regain part of the respect that was fading. A woman may disagree with you, but she can't ignore your strength. Respect is the soil where attraction grows. When she starts comparing you, she's eroding it. That's why, in a healthy relationship, differences don't turn into competition. They create balance. So if you ever hear that phrase, don't take it as just another comment. It's a warning that something is breaking. And if you don't stop it there, what comes next will be even more dangerous, because it won't be comparison anymore, but emotional manipulation. Let's talk about that next. This phrase may sound harmless, even romantic, but it's actually one of the most subtle forms of emotional manipulation. When a woman says, "If you loved me, you'd do this," she's not asking for love. She's conditioning your actions to gain control. She's turning affection into currency. And the most dangerous part is that once you give in, she learns she can use it again to get whatever she wants. That's how emotional blackmail begins, where love stops being mutual respect and becomes guilt-driven power. The relationship stops being built on connection and starts running on obligation. In healthy relationships, love doesn't demand constant proof or sacrifice. You don't need to prove your feelings by agreeing to things that compromise your peace or your values. But many men fall into this trap because they confuse love with total surrender. They believe that giving in means commitment, and they end up abandoning themselves just to keep the peace. That kind of limitless giving becomes an invisible prison. The more you do to make her happy, the less she respects you, because to her, your love feels weak and without boundaries. And a woman can't admire a man who allows himself to be manipulated in the name of love. Understanding this, we can see that this phrase always shows up at key moments, when she wants to impose something you're not comfortable accepting. She might use it to ask for money, favors, time, or even to justify behavior you know is wrong. The issue isn't what she's asking for, but how she's asking. When love becomes the argument, the conversation stops being rational and turns emotional. She knows that if she makes you feel guilty, she'll get what she wants. That's why the boundary shouldn't be set on the request. It should be set on the manipulation itself. A woman who respects you will never use your love to get her way. She'll speak clearly, explain her view, and listen to yours. But when she brings in, "If you loved me," she's appealing to guilt, not dialogue. She's doing it because she wants to see you yield, not understand you. And every time you give in, you lose emotional credibility. Each victory of guilt kills a little more respect. You stop being her partner and become her emotional tool, someone who must constantly prove his love. At that point, the relationship becomes unbalanced. She demands, you prove. She judges, you justify. In the end, love turns into a courtroom where you're always the one on trial. There's no way to keep your dignity in a relationship where love is used as leverage for obedience. Real connection doesn't need blackmail, it needs boundaries. A calm and respectful no can save you from a destructive dynamic. If she says, "If you loved me, you'd do this," you can reply calmly, "I love you, but I also respect myself." That sentence breaks the pattern. It reminds her that your love is not negotiable, but neither is your self-respect. A man who knows how to set emotional boundaries becomes more attractive, not more distant, because he shows that his affection has strength and direction, not weakness. No emotionally mature woman uses guilt to manipulate. If she does, it's because her idea of love is distorted, maybe from insecurity, emotional wounds, or from learning that control is the only way to feel safe. But the reason doesn't change the outcome. Love becomes contaminated. At that point, the only way to heal the relationship is by resetting the dynamic, or, if there's no willingness to change, walking away before you lose yourself completely. When love is used to pressure, it's no longer love. It's power disguised as tenderness. And that power drains any man who tries to keep the peace at the expense of his dignity. To love doesn't mean giving in to everything. It means staying true to yourself, even when someone tries to break you with their words. Do that, and her respect may return. If not, only guilt will remain. Before moving on to the next sign, I want to invite you to take a quick pause. If this content is helping you see your relationships more clearly, please subscribe, like, and comment with your name and country, so I know where in the world this community is from. I always read your comments, and it means a lot to hear your stories and experiences. You can also share how you've gone through something similar, or what you learned from it. It truly makes a difference and helps my work tremendously. Now let's get back to it. Because what comes next isn't about manipulation anymore, it's about total emotional disconnection. It's the phrase that creates the greatest distance between a man and a woman, and it almost always appears when she has completely stopped admiring you. That phrase, spoken with pride or coldness, isn't a declaration of independence, it's a wall. "I don't need any man" may sound like a display of strength, but in reality, it's a defense built out of pain. A woman who has healed and truly knows herself can be self-sufficient without denying her natural desire for connection. But when that phrase shows up in a relationship, it means she no longer wants to build. She wants to protect herself. The worrying part is that if you hear it from your partner, she's not talking about men in general, she's talking about you. What she's really saying is that she no longer sees you as an addition to her life. And when a woman stops seeing you as someone who adds value, attraction, and respect, begin to fade. At its core, this phrase reveals deep emotional disconnection. It's her way of saying, "I won't let you in anymore." Behind those words is a woman who's hardened herself to avoid feeling vulnerable again. Maybe she once gave too much, was betrayed or disappointed, and learned that depending on a man hurts. So she builds her independence like armor. But what many don't see is that this armor also blocks affection. It's not strength, it's fear disguised as strength. And if it isn't recognized in time, it turns the relationship into a competition. Who needs less? Who shows less affection? Who yields less? In that game, nobody wins. We've already seen that the previous phrases were about control or manipulation, but this one goes further. It denies the natural complementarity between man and woman. Because the truth is, no one needs the other to exist, but we do need each other to grow. Relationships aren't about dependency, they're about reciprocity. When a woman says, "I don't need any man," she's not affirming independence, she's rejecting connection. And in doing so, she destroys what once held you together, mutual admiration. Many men, upon hearing this phrase, try to compensate with more effort. They start doing everything possible to prove they're valuable, useful, that she actually does need them. But that approach only makes things worse. Because every time you try to justify your place, you confirm that she's right not to value you. The right response isn't to convince her she needs you. It's to show that you don't need to be needed, you want to be chosen. That your worth isn't in filling voids, but in sharing from emotional abundance. A woman who clings to that phrase lives from a place of defense. She's not trying to build, she's trying not to be hurt. And while that's understandable, it makes genuine connection impossible. If every gesture of affection is seen as a threat to her independence, love turns into a constant struggle. At that point, the relationship hardens instead of flowing. It's like trying to hug someone wearing armor. You can get close, but you never really touch. The energy cools, communication dries up, and what was once closeness becomes tension. The hardest truth for many men to accept is that this phrase can't always be reversed. It isn't solved with patience or with more love, it's solved with boundaries. Because if you keep trying to melt a wall, she's determined to keep standing, you'll end up exhausted, empty, and stripped of self-worth. Sometimes, maturity means accepting that you can't rescue someone who doesn't want to be rescued. If she insists she doesn't need any man, believe her. Not as defeat, but as self-respect. When a woman opens herself to love, she doesn't lose independence, she shares it. But when she uses her independence to create distance, she's telling you there's no longer room for you. That's when you have to decide whether to stay in a relationship where you're unnecessary or walk toward one where you're valued for who you are. Independence is beautiful, but pride disguised as strength destroys everything it touches. In a healthy relationship, both partners need each other without depending, choose each other without fear, and admire each other without competing. When that phrase appears and repeats, balance is gone. What's left is resistance. And constant resistance is what eventually suffocates the relationship. At that moment, the wisest choice isn't to fight to stay. It's to have the courage to step back and reclaim your peace. After understanding this emotional distance, we move to an even more destructive phrase, the one that not only disconnects you, but directly blames you for everything that goes wrong. It's the expression of contempt turned into guilt. And when it shows up, the relationship is already on the verge of breaking. When a woman says, "You ruin everything," she's not trying to solve a problem, she's looking for someone to blame. It's the phrase that turns a disagreement into a battlefield and marks the point where love becomes reproach. It's a way to project frustration and wipe away her own responsibility. Instead of talking about what hurts, she turns it into an accusation, and with that, she destroys the foundation of the relationship, emotional fairness. When a woman uses that phrase, she doesn't want to understand you, she wants to punish you. And if you fall into the trap of defending yourself, she gains emotional ground, because the moment you do, the discussion stops being about healing and becomes about proving who's right. This phrase is born out of emotional immaturity. It comes from someone who doesn't know how to regulate her emotions and prefers to blame rather than look within. It's the reflection of a mindset that can't separate a single conflict from an overall judgment. By saying, "You ruin everything," she erases the good, denies the shared moments, and reduces the entire relationship to a mistake. And the worst part is, if you stay silent or try to calm her down by apologizing for something you didn't do, you validate her perception. Guilt takes root, and every time a problem arises, she'll use the same tactic to control you emotionally. By now, you understand that respect isn't lost overnight. Phrases like this are accumulated symptoms. When a woman reaches the point of blaming you for everything, she's no longer arguing with you, she's fighting her own dissatisfaction. But if you accept the role of the guilty one, the dynamic turns toxic. She becomes the victim, you become the justifier, and the cycle repeats over and over. That victim-savior pattern is one of the most destructive in a relationship because it turns love into punishment and daily life into a never-ending test. An emotionally mature man doesn't argue with an accusation. He stops it, not out of anger, but out of calm authority. He doesn't need to shout or prove his innocence. It's enough to say, "I won't accept being spoken to that way. If you want to talk, we can do it when we're both calm." That response isn't cold or distant, it's firm, because when you stay emotionally centered, you break the pattern she's trying to impose. Guilt only works when someone accepts it, and once you stop doing that, her strategy loses its power. The goal isn't to convince her she's wrong, but to show through your actions that you won't be the target of her emotional outbursts. Here's something crucial to understand. No one ruins everything alone. Relationships are systems where both people contribute to the outcome, but emotional immaturity always takes the easy road, and blaming the other person is easier than taking responsibility. When she does that, she's not measuring your mistakes, she's avoiding her own reflection. If you keep accepting that story, time will eventually convince you that you really are the problem. And that's the beginning of the silent collapse of a man's self-worth, when he starts apologizing for simply being himself. Chronic guilt in a relationship is like a drop of water falling on stone. You don't notice it at first, but over time it wears down even the strongest character. The sad truth is that many men stay, not because they lack dignity, but because they love deeply. They believe that if they keep trying, she'll eventually see the good again. But the reality is that once a woman gets used to blaming you, she no longer sees you as her partner. She sees you as her adversary. And you can't love someone you've turned into an enemy. So when you hear that phrase, don't take it as a venting of emotion. See it for what it is, a declaration of emotional war. Don't respond with anger, but don't submit either. Respond with boundaries, because if you don't, you ruin everything becomes another brick in the wall separating you from yourself. And when a man disconnects from his own worth, he stops being desired, stops being respected, and ends up merely tolerated. A relationship can only grow when both people take responsibility for their part. When one of them clings to the victim role, the story stops moving forward, and no love can survive that. At that point, the healthiest thing isn't to keep arguing, but to look at the truth with cold clarity. If she blames you for everything, it's because she stopped seeing you as a partner and started seeing you as an excuse. And once you reach that stage, the next step isn't to repair. It's to decide whether your dignity matters more than your fear of being alone. Now let's talk about the final stage of this journey. Because when you've heard all these phrases and you're still there, the problem is no longer what she says. It's what you allow. And that's the moment that determines whether a man loses himself or becomes stronger. Reaching this point isn't about blaming the woman. It's about looking inward. When respect breaks, the real issue is no longer what she says, but what you tolerate. The phrases we've discussed don't appear overnight. They're the result of a dynamic where you gradually gave up your place. Maybe at first it was jokes, harmless comments, or passing arguments, but every time you chose to stay quiet to avoid making things worse, you gave away a piece of yourself. The sum of all those silences is what eventually destroys the admiration she once felt for you. No relationship ends because of a single phrase. It ends because of repeated silence. A man who doesn't set boundaries isn't being understanding. He's surrendering his power. And when that happens, the relationship stops being a space of love and turns into one of exhaustion. Disrespect becomes normal. Reproaches become routine. Comparisons turn into habit. And what was once connection becomes indifference. In that environment, love doesn't grow, it withers. Because respect is the root that holds everything else together. You can lose passion and rebuild it. You can have differences and overcome them. But once respect is gone, there's no way back. We've already learned that loving someone doesn't mean enduring everything. It means knowing when to stay and when to leave. Some men stay out of fear of being alone, others out of habit, and some because they still believe she'll change. But the truth is, change doesn't come from guilt or pain. It comes from awareness. And if she doesn't acknowledge that she's disrespected you, she's not going to change just because you remain there. Your presence isn't a punishment, but it's not a reward either. Without respect, there's no relationship worth your time. Ending a relationship due to lack of respect isn't defeat, it's dignity. It's understanding that love can't exist where admiration has been lost. That silence isn't peace, it's fear disguised as calm. And that staying to rescue what no longer exists only delays your growth. Some breakups hurt, but they also let you breathe again. They remind you who you were before you started trying to please someone who no longer saw you. They teach you that solitude isn't punishment. It's a chance to rebuild your worth from within. An honest man doesn't seek revenge or resentment. He seeks clarity. He's grateful for what he experienced, learns what he needs to learn, and moves forward without looking back. Because he knows that every ending is also a filter. What breaks simply wasn't as solid as it seemed. And sometimes, true self-love begins the moment you choose to close the door on emotional mistreatment, without shouting, without drama, only with silence and determination. Remember this, respect can't be demanded, it must be inspired. It can't be begged for, it must be cultivated. And when it's lost, the wisest thing you can do isn't to force its return, but to walk away with your head held high. Because your worth doesn't depend on her understanding you, it depends on you never forgetting who you are. Now that you've made it this far, stay with me a little longer. In the closing, I want to speak directly to you, the man who listens to this not from pain, but from the maturity that comes after opening his eyes. Because there's one final message every man who's been devalued needs to hear before he starts again. If you've made it this far, you've already taken a huge step, stopping the habit of justifying the unjustifiable. You've understood that when a woman loses respect for you, her love changes shape. It turns into reproach, indifference, or control. And most importantly, you've realized that you can't heal a relationship at the cost of your dignity. Attraction can be rebuilt, trust can be restored, but lost respect rarely returns. That's why, when words turn into wounds, silence must become a decision. Not to punish, but to protect what matters most, your frame, your peace, and your worth as a man. Each of those phrases we discussed, contempt, comparison, manipulation, disconnection, or blame, are signs that emotional balance has been broken. But this isn't about judging, it's about observing and choosing. A mature man doesn't keep arguing with disrespect. He steps back, breathes, and decides from clarity. Not every love can be saved, and that's not a tragedy. It's part of growing up, because a man who respects himself never begs for attention or pleads for affection. He simply becomes someone who inspires respect by the way he values himself, not by what he demands. Sometimes, the end of a relationship isn't the closing of a story, it's the beginning of a more conscious version of yourself. If you choose to let go, do it without hate. If you choose to stay, do it with boundaries. But never become a shadow of who you were, out of fear of losing her. Whoever truly admires you will stand beside you without belittling you, and if she doesn't, let her go. Respect isn't negotiable, it's preserved. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this video gave you something to think about, I invite you to support this work with a like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so we can keep growing together. Leave a comment with your name and country. I love seeing where each man in this community is from. And if you want, share your story or advice, because your words might help another man going through the same thing. Sending you a big hug, and remember, when a man chooses himself, nothing can stop him.